Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rachel Erickson, and I'm the Head of Learning and Engagement at the Manitoba Museum. I'm here today in the Winnipeg Gallery of the museum. We're closed today, even though it's our 50th anniversary, so we're doing things a little differently this year. First, I'll just get you two to introduce ourselves. We're doing a bit of a technology hack that isn't really working very well, so forgive our weird little passing of this tiny square mic.
I'm Dr. Roland Sawatzky, Curator of History at the Manitoba Museum.
And I'm Andreas Youseph, a community member and recent donator to the museum's collection, or donor, I guess.
Awesome. So we are here because today is the 50th birthday of the Manitoba Museum. We've been a museum for, well, we've had a collection for longer than that, but we've called ourselves a museum for about 50 years. So today's a special day for us. We had big plans for this day in terms of a big party with cake and fun, and obviously that wasn't going to happen this year. So we decided to kind of shift gears and do something a little different. So what we're doing today is pretty much just reflecting on our last 50 years, but then also thinking, what are we doing to prepare for the future? What do we want our next 50 years to be like? And how are we, I guess, trying to be proactive about all the really important things that are happening in the world right now. It's been a year that I think none of us probably anticipated for many, many different reasons. And 2020 is impacting everybody in a different way, but at the same time, in kind of the same way. So what we're here to talk about is just a little bit about how we collect, how we exhibit objects, how we tell stories, and what we're doing right now to collect some of the big things that are happening right now, such as the pandemic and big international events such as the Black Lives Matter movement. So maybe I'll just start by getting Roland to tell us a little bit about this gallery and how you decided to, I guess, what kind of collecting had to go into having these stories told, and can you point out a few artifacts that you think are kind of special to tell that story?
Sure. A little bit of background on collecting. Manitobans have been collecting for Manitoba Museum since the 1870s, so a long time, and there have been different versions of the museum over time. And the 50th anniversary we're celebrating today is the 50th anniversary of this building and this iteration of the Manitoba Museum. But some of these collections you see behind me are from those earlier periods, and some we've collected in the last year for this gallery to tell the history of Winnipeg. So collecting doesn't stop, history doesn't stop, and we're always thinking about what will be important for the future. It's impossible to know exactly and to predict, but that's part of our job here at the museum, is to make sure that we're always preserving something for future generations to learn about us and about our history. So a couple of items I could point out in here. I wanted to bring the museum up to date. The last, when the museum was first built in the 1970s, Manitoba was a different place, of course. And the social fabric of our city has changed quite a bit since then. So we wanted to include more stories. And one way we do that is through artifacts. Another way is through interviews and interactions with the community. But one of the artifacts that we commissioned actually for this gallery was this Cub Address. It's a Nigerian Cub Address, and it was made by Olayinka Ali. And we talked about, what kind of dress she would like to see in our gallery here, to talk about the Nigerian community in Manitoba, to talk about immigration, and to talk about the kinds of businesses and aspirations people coming to Manitoba have. And so this was a great way to share her story and her activities in our city. Another item that had come a couple of years earlier that we advocated for was this T-shirt, Idle No More, which talks about the Indigenous movement for justice and environmental justice in Canada. And this really spread across the world as well. It was a really important movement and still reverberates today. And so we thought that was a really important thing to put in this section of the gallery, where we talk about Winnipeg as a city of contrasts.
Awesome. So maybe I'm going to push it over to Andreas. So let's maybe just zoom in on what Andreas has donated for us recently. Maybe we could try to put it up a bit. And then I'll just ask you to maybe share your story of why you decided to donate to the museum, and I guess from your personal perspective, why do you think it's important that museums are collecting contemporary artifacts that are talking about what's happening right now?
Sure. So I decided to first attend this, the Black Lives Matter protest put on by the Justice for Black Lives movement, just because obviously this is something that we've seen occur a lot within the States, but not necessarily as widely publicized here in Canada, although we do see similar incidents of police brutality and just kind of Black and Indigenous people being downtrodden by the system. So it was really important for me, my family, and people in the community to kind of attend this event. So that's why I went in the first place. The reason I donated the sign was when I was contacted, I thought that it was really important that the stories of like average people are told. I'm not, you know, the leader of the movement. I don't claim to be, but I think it was really important, especially with museum collections, that we see how the average day-to-day person lives, not necessarily always just the most important people in the room. So you get kind of more of an accurate depiction of day-to-day life. And yeah, so that was why I decided to donate the sign.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Just the idea of museums, you know, not just collecting like really famous people's artifacts, because this is what, at least from my perspective, what I really love about this gallery is that it collects kind of the ordinary person, the everyday person. And what we hope out of this gallery is that kind of Winnipeggers will come and see themselves here, because, you know, everybody has a story. And I think that's what we really tried to put into this space was that, yeah, you don't have to be famous to have a really interesting life. And these stories come out really well. The other part of it is, you know, collecting that isn't artifact based, because, you know, a lot of people don't necessarily have things they either want to give up or can give up. So maybe we could just talk a little bit, Roland, about the idea of collecting oral histories and stories. And I think, I mean, that kind of what we did when we collected this sign was we also, you know, collected your thoughts. And
yes.
Yeah, do you want to maybe share a little bit about, I guess, the story behind, like telling that story and how you think that is important to get preserved?
Sure. I think that it's important that we not only have like physical artifacts, but kind of an oral history, because a lot of the time artifacts can be misinterpreted. By giving an oral history, I'm able to give not just like an artistic representation, but also kind of my thoughts, my feelings that maybe don't translate as well in a physical artifact. So I think having those stories available, especially in a format that can be widely accessible, and by whether it's interview, whether it's an audio clip, whether it's put online, I think just having a full breadth of that kind of information is super important.
Yeah, and so Roland, from your perspective as someone who works in a museum and puts together exhibitions, what does it mean to you to have that kind of oral history background, kind of supporting, whether it's supporting a physical artifact or not?
It's incredibly important, and like you said, brings across so much more of the story and the emotions tied to that story to the visitor. And oftentimes it's those emotions and those firsthand experiences that are what visitors take away with them, because it's so meaningful. So when we were first conceptualizing this gallery, one of the first things we did was go out to the community and gather stories from people, gather those oral histories. And then from that, we were able to build the gallery. And so this table here talks about the immigration experience of a lot of people coming to Winnipeg. And it includes artifacts, but these artifacts, some of these are 80, 100 years old. But the interviews themselves are from people living here right now, people that have come to Canada and Manitoba relatively recently. And we connect that experience from 100 years ago to the experience of people right now. So we hope to get more meaning into the old artifacts that way, but also connect people with their community right now.
So the other thing that's obviously happening to us all right now is the pandemic. And we've had some conversations at the museum about previous pandemics that have happened in the city. We've had a program kind of talking about different things that different pandemics that have impacted us here. And so you were mentioning how you we're looking through the collections to see, oh, maybe we have something that can represent the Spanish flu that obviously really impacted Winnipeg and Manitoba, but we just don't have anything in our collections. So right now, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what we're going to try and what we started to do to collect this 2020 pandemic and be a little proactive about that.
Yeah, and there the big question is, how do you collect a pandemic? In a way, you don't really want to, right? But at the same time, this is such an incredibly important part of our lives and will impact many people for decades that we really want to preserve that experience. And Rachel's right. When I looked for 1918 pandemic artifacts, we have none in our collection, and yet it's an incredibly important story. And so I want us to be proactive this time and get out there in the community and make sure that we have some record in a physical sense of what's happening to us right now. So we have started reaching out to the community to ask for artifacts related to COVID-19. These can be things like signs, artifacts, objects that you've made in response. I saw a great one today on a telephone pole. It was a piece of embroidery that said, Winnipeg, stay together, and then in parentheses, and apart, and then a heart. And it was, embroidery stapled onto a wooden pole. And I thought, wow, I'd love to have that for the museum. But at the same time, right now, it's really important to keep it up because it's an inspirational place for people. So we want to balance that. We would like these objects, including washed face masks. I'd really like a great collection of those. But of course, people are still using them and we want them to keep using them. So we'd like people to think about in the future, when the time comes, what could be done with these objects, to think of the Manitoba Museum. And you might already have objects like that. And the same thing goes for the Black Lives Matter movement and the importance of that in our society right now in Canada, North America, and the world. We don't have a lot of signs. I can't think of any that we have from previous demonstrations, events, protests in Winnipeg. But these are really important moments that define us as a society. And really, especially this one, I think, really helps us rethink what our society is and how it should be. So we want to capture that in a sense for a future generation. And so again, we would like to, put a call out there to people to think of donating a sign or some other object or important personal possession that would help tell that story in the future. Again, it wouldn't have to be right now. It could be at a time when it's comfortable for you. So if you're thinking of donating something like this, then please feel free to contact me at rsawatzky@manitobamuseum.ca and rsawatzky@manitobamuseum.ca.
So we're going to take a second now just to answer some questions. So I think what we'll get is, I'll just come and look at the questions on the screen because that'll be the easiest way to do it. And then I'll read them out and people can answer them. Okay, lots of great questions here. Let me see. Okay, here's a good question. Well, they're all good questions. Okay, let's ask. How would the museum deal with sensitive, in quotes, material relating to police brutality or material that depicts individuals? How would we protect their identity? Or would we choose not to collect material that identifies individuals? And how are we working with communities along those lines? So that's kind of a lot of questions together, but let's start there.
Sure. And this has come up before. We always have this discussion with the individual who's donating. Anonymity is not an issue for us. We have done that before. We can protect people's identity. It's a big part of what we, it's part of how we work here. And so that would just have to be discussed with the curator. And we have anonymous stories right here on this, in this table as well. That's just something that we've been working towards for many, many years.
Sure. I think as a community member, we need to make decisions kind of for our own safety, our own health, our own even mental and emotional well-being. So I think that that is a kind of decision that each individual needs to make on a case-by-case basis. But given that I am donating to the museum, I can say that I was asked questions about whether I would like my name and likeness to be attached to this. So I think the museum, from my experience at least, has done a good job of taking that into consideration.
Yeah, and I think for anyone who would be considering donating, yeah, just know that anonymity is always an option, and it doesn't mean your story isn't important. I think, you know, being able to, yeah, come up with an alias is something that we've definitely done before, and yeah, like we said, it's happened in this gallery. So, you know, those stories can still be shared just by being, and keep them anonymous. Let's read another question. Okay. Okay. And to follow up from that question, are we collecting posters or materials from police abolitionist groups and or local groups such as Police Cause Harm? Good question.
Yeah, you know, we are open to collecting anything that has to deal with, you know, these important questions for society. That is always any object that we collect is always a case-by-case basis. We have a discussion with the donor, how they would like it to be, you know, used here, and the whole anonymity question. But certainly, yeah, we're open to collecting anything along those lines.
Yeah, and I think what's kind of come out of us having this kind of time to reflect is, yeah, what are we going to be proactive about collecting? So not just always saying, oh, let's just hope someone comes to us and wants to donate something, but it's thinking, yeah, what stories are important to tell and how can we represent that either through artifacts or through oral histories, if that's fair to say. Do we have another question? Yeah, a question if Andreas had any concerns about being visibly associated with your donated artifact.
For myself, I don't feel any discomfort. I think I'm lucky in that sense that I feel comfortable doing this. So from a personal standpoint, I didn't have any issues. But again, as I said, when I went into the donation process, this is something that I considered and was brought up by the museum staff with me, by Rachel and by Roland, at several times, just to kind of ensure that I was feeling comfortable with it. But again, I would encourage anyone who is potentially thinking of donating items to take that into consideration and decide whether you would like to keep yourself anonymous or whether you feel that attaching a name can help, I would say, like broaden the horizons of your story. It gives people someone to connect with. I find that people are more likely to connect with a story if they have a person to look at. But don't let that be the thing that drives you towards attaching your name to it if that's not something that you feel comfortable doing.
Someone's wondering
Awesome.
if Roland could talk about something else in this.
Oh, yeah, sure. The question is just, could Roland maybe talk about something else that he finds very interesting in this wall, which I'm sure you could do. Do you have, how much time do you have?
Yeah, exactly. Next 3-hour lecture. Oh gosh, what else is great here? Oh, come on. Come on over here. Let's take a look. Yeah, that'd be great too. Okay, so these pots, I think, are fascinating. These are reproductions of pots found at the Forks in archaeological contexts, and they relate to a peace treaty in 1285. So about 750 years ago, that happened at the Forks. There were 9 different nations who met there, and they evidently there was some environmental stress, which was creating tensions between the groups over a vast area, over a couple of thousand kilometers. And they decided to meet at the Forks and make a treaty there so that they would share resources somewhat peacefully over time. And these pots are evidence of that, because these pots come from those 9 different nations. And we know that by the style of the pot and linking them up to groups, known groups throughout Central North America. It's really a fantastic exhibit.
think we'll just see if there's any more final questions before we wrap it up. Let's see. No, I think we're good. Perfect. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today for our 50th anniversary pop-up talk about Collecting 2020. If you have any other questions, feel free to send them through our Facebook page or through email. You can find all of our contact details on the Manitoba Museum website. Thank you so much, Andreas, for taking time out of your day and coming to join us. It's always just, I don't know, storytelling is just so much more important when it's from the person who has the story to tell. So thank you so much for that. And yeah, thanks for joining.
Thanks a lot.